The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
Hi, this is Victor Tiffany with Revolt Against Plutocracy, talking tonight. Someone who's known as the math poet, John Laurits, is a poet, a journalist, an activist who lives in Oregon. He has a degree in Eastern philosophy, and he first gained notoriety in 2016 for writing a series of articles to demystify the math behind the delicate system used in the Democratic primaries. Most of his work is published on his website, and I'm going to list the story or the article we're going to talk about, which is objectivity in journalism. I will put that in the description section, either above or below this video, depending on whether we're on Facebook or YouTube. At any rate, he's been also published on Real Progressives and Politics and Stuff. He's appeared on podcasts, radio, and talk shows, including Radio Sputnik's Fault Lines, Solomon, the podcast, KPFA, and Our Revolution's The Robust Opposition. John's been cited by Russian television's Lee Camp, Naked Capitalism, and the BCC. His articles have been shared on social media by the likes of Jill Stein and Mark Ruffalo. John, thank you for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So in your article that really caught my attention, journalism is never objective. News media objectivity is ideology. Let's just begin with a simple question. I read it, I understand it, but most people might wonder what the hell you mean. Why is journalism never objective?
That's a good question. And real quick, I want to clarify too that I can't put it in like every article, but I use the word ideology in a really specific manner to it. It's so a lot of people throw it around like in the same sense as like worldview, you know, like an ideology, political ideology. So they say like political worldview or religious ideology, as in religious worldview. Now, the sense that I'm using the word ideology is really strict in that it's ideology is all those things that whenever you hear someone say like everyone knows that or it's common sense, that's ideology. For example, like, you know, the idea that bigger is better is ubiquitous in consumer cultures like ours, but in like a nomadic culture, the idea of bigger is better, that would make no sense at all. You know, like you got to carry things, right? You know, it's like why would bigger be better? You know, like smaller's better.
So it's something akin to a worldview then?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's the worldview, but it's not so much the conscious chosen worldview as it is like the perspectives that are imposed on us from the moment we are born and begin to be socialized that we take as given, as common sense, for granted, you know?
Sure. So why is journalism never objective?
Journalism is never objective because the concept of, in a nutshell, I mean, this is what the whole article is about, but in a nutshell, I would say that the concept of objectivity, which then also, of course, brings up subjectivity, applies this dialectic there. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to journalism because the most important thing to understand, I think, is that every journalist, every group of journalists are persons. They are people who exist in a time and a place, and their perspective is angled, you know, according to that time or place. Whether I'm from the United States, I'm a white, you know, male, neurodivergent person in Oregon, you know, and so all of that is going to inform what I think is important enough to even report in the first place. So even however meticulous I can be with facts, it's impossible to change that fundamental perspective, you know, and that's not going to be universal because other people are not from Oregon. And other people may not be white. Other people may be males, you know, and so on, and all these sort of intersections of identity.
So there isn't objectivity, there is perspective. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, I bring up in the article too. I bring up the notion of situated knowledges, which this feminist scholar named Donna Haraway came up with this kind of alternative model. Like, she was speaking largely about the sciences and things like that, and how, I mean, to label something objective like that is that's always to assert its authority. And it's generally like when someone says that, you know, like my source is objective, or my worldview or knowledge or model or whatever, you know, is objective, like it's almost always implying, you know, that it's more objective than yours, right? Yeah. Or that whatever you're presenting or model you're presenting is polluted by this like subjectivity, whereas mine is pure, it's objective, right? And so
Right.
Haraway argues for like kind of throwing that world, that view out the window there, you know, and opting for something that is more in line with reality.
So she actually, and you cite in your article, situated knowledges that are based in class, which I think is probably primary, but also race and education and a number of other factors. One thing you don't mention, and this for me comes from Jürgen Habermas, who wrote at one point that fact and value are radically homogeneous. So I've run with that. Previously argued that the objectivity is also a myth, but for slightly different reason, and that is we all have values, and I think certainly in corporate media, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CBS, BBC, and all the rest, I think that's largely a factor of class. But woven into all that are our values, which come perhaps from our religious upbringing or from family upbringing and so forth. You don't mention the role of values in the undermining and impossibility of objectivity. Would you speak to values in that way?
I will, yeah. And I would have loved to have said more about values in there. I try to limit my article's length because I want to be accessible, and a lot of people don't have time to read, you know, 30-page treatise on things, even though I'd like to write that sometimes. But yeah, values. I also want to say too that I think it's kind of like implicit, you know, in class and race and gender and sexuality and all those different things, you know, all the different layers of identity. But I didn't speak explicitly to values. I think that one place where that directly ties into what I'm talking about in the article is that to report something at all, like to even bring up, you know, hey, this thing is happening, or oh, look, let's analyze, you know, the behavior of these politicians, or whatever. To even bring those things up, what that says is that this is important. And of course, you know, important can't be an objective term. So what that really means is I value this information. I think that you should value this information, you know? And I mean, from my perspective, I mean, it seems like most journalists, most of the time at least, are not aware of that dynamic. That they're, the very fact that they chose to report on, you know, the Kardashians or on Russiagate or any particular topic, that is a value decision. And it's also an assertion of values, because not only are you in a way stating like, but you're also asserting it upon the readers or the viewers or whatever. You're saying that you should find them too. You should also value this, you know, information that I'm going to present.
A lot of people consider themselves well informed because they watch the news every night, or maybe they watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC, and they view themselves as well informed without realizing that of what you're talking about, that they're only getting what these journalists want them to want you to know about the world, and they don't tell you what they don't want you to know. I'll give a real quick example. I didn't mention in my introduction, but we're the group that was behind the Burn Your Bus movement, and never ever on MSNBC did you hear that phrase mentioned until Sarah Silverman blurted it out during the DNC. They kept that completely suppressed during the primaries. They did not want their audience to know about that movement. I suspect that came from higher up. So there is also the role, regardless of where the journalists themselves stand, of the corporate muckamucks above them saying, here's what we're talking about. And right. So we're getting not just the bias of journalists' values and their class and their own web of subjectivity, but they're also basically under the orders and the rules of who's ever hiring them. There's certain things they can't say, and I think it was it you? Or, there's another journalist who talks about this. I'll mention her in a minute. But Chomsky once was being interviewed by somebody, and he said the journalist was questioning what Chomsky's point was, and he said, "Well, if you had a different view, you wouldn't be sitting in that seat." And that's the point, right? They don't get to be truly independent. They have to do what their corporate masters allow them to do. That's a part of it too, right? The lack of object,
Yeah.
not even their own subjectivity, but part of how they do journalism.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I love Chomsky's stuff on media too. Like he's got a lot of good things to say. Or like he's critical analysis, I think, of how media actually functions. You know, and I'm really glad that you brought this up too, because yeah, you're right. It's not even just you know, the journalist. Well, there's the journalist or the reporter, you know, or whoever, like, who may have some autonomy, like, within that kind of narrow frame. But like generally speaking, truly independent journalists that are left, you know, and so generally speaking, they're being hired by a company, you know, and that company has, you know, a board of directors, and it has higher ups who also have their ideology. They also have their perspectives and the limits that they are going to, you know, demand be placed upon the content. And then yeah, you know, that order comes down from above. And so then what you get is like multiple kind of like filters, like, you know, and yeah, there's this kind of controlling one at the top, which capitalist, you know, society, the one we live in, the bosses are the top of the media, you know, so then they kind of act all the way down to the reporters in the field. So yeah, you're not even dealing with just one person's, you know, bias
hierarchy of viewpoints.
Yeah. There's actually an intersecting sort of like, yeah, like multi-dimensional filter that's being placed between us and the information that we receive through, especially like the major outlets, you know, the big mass media. Right.
So I made reference to this other analyst and media critic, Caitlin Johnstone. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she has made you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware of her. Yeah.
So she's made the argument that everything is narrative. Everything is narrative. Everything we understand came from somebody describing it somewhere, either from a book or a classroom or media. Everything's narrative. So if that's the case, if everything is narrative, then how are we, not just you, but people in general, how are we to actually understand reality, to break through the corporate narrative, to break through the establishment narrative or the elite narrative? How are we to actually gain an understanding of reality if everything is narrative, and all these narratives, particularly in the media, are created by the plutocratic owners of these corporate regimes, these corporate media outlets?
Yeah. How do I phrase this? So I have read, like, not everything, but I read, you know, Johnstone, like when I see it popping up in my feed, and I'm like, okay, what's she saying? And I'm aware of she's done like more than one on the same kind of topic, but I did read one article like in which she did make the point that like everything was narrative, and I respect her as a journalist, and I also respectfully disagree like with that point. Although like qualify that by saying that a lot of stuff is narrative, you know, that there is a lot of unreal or kind of like, I guess, malicious stories, like we get to choose how we understand and frame things. Like that's definitely like an important force. But I mean, I would actually argue that for the same reasons that I think you said, that you felt like the class was primary, like earlier. Even those get into economic and social relations between different classes of people, and that actually like and again, while narrative is really important to consider and to understand and to be aware of and to criticize, because it's the filter on the way we understand things. I wouldn't say it's everything. I think that actually the base is ultimately those material relations. Like for example, here's a good example. So I think I use this example in a little bit of a different way in the article. But so almost every national newspaper that I'm aware of, if you go out and flip one of those machines, if they still have those even, but you open it up, you will find, a section on the stock market, on, and there are going to be articles discussing, how the Dow is doing this week and how, the S&P 500 and so on. Now, upwards of 90% of the stocks are owned by like less than 1 in 10 of us, So I mean, like the material reality is that we don't really have a stake. We don't have a dog in that fight. Most people don't have a reason to give a shit about the stock market, and yet that's the narrative that's pushed. And the reason why that narrative is pushed, and that is narrative, like that is like presenting that as like this important upfront aspect of society is totally a narrative. But the reason why that narrative is there is because of these, relations that exist under, capitalism. That being that the same people who own these media companies, who decide what sections are going to be in the newspaper, are the people who own the stock, and they genuinely, like, it's not even. Maybe it's malicious sometimes, but I mean, I think that in this case, they're genuinely just unable to imagine that anyone, including their readers, might not care about the stock market. And that's rooted in, ultimately, these class relations and stuff like that. But I agree that there is this congealed mass of narrative that's going to coat everything.
So my question was, how are people to actually get a good understanding of reality, of our world?
How to penetrate the veil of narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, honestly, like, I mean, I'm a journalist and stuff, so I guess I have some insight, but I'm not like. I would hesitate to consider myself an authority on like how you can know the truth of like what's going on or anything like that. But since you're asking for my advice. I mean, like, one, I think it's just, it's standard good advice, like, read a variety of sources, one. And some things are bullshit, like Breitbart, I mean, I read it just to see what the enemy is doing, or whatever. But, like, as far as news goes, it's basically garbage. Same thing, like, InfoWars, and I'll stop name dropping. But I mean, even within that, like, I think it can be valuable to read that or to view it or whatever, in order to get the full spectrum. I mean, that's one really important step, but that has to be combined too, I think, with like, it has to be combined with, the key is to be aware of these class perspectives or these race perspectives, that the filters through which these media are presenting them. So like, for instance, MSNBC, like, you have to be aware that this is extremely Democratic Party, DNC kind of controlled media company. That doesn't mean that they don't report facts and that you can't like look at MSNBC and see what they're saying. Like I do it all the time, like to write the things that I write. Like Fox News, that I don't believe, like the things that are obviously garbage, on Fox News. But it's important to like understand. Okay, so what's this like wider, more conservative, more male Republican GOP affiliated kind of perspective, like what are they saying, and why are they saying it? What are the interests that they're sort of like? What values are they asserting? So like right now, like Fox News is asserting their value, I guess encapsulated as like nationalism. They're going on and on about the the immigrants, the invasion, and that's how they see things, and I think that that's a ridiculous and unhelpful way to like frame the world. But that is.
You give an example in your article, if I could just interrupt you quickly, of two completely different looking presidencies, separate
Yeah.
set of facts, and they're both about Obama, just using separate facts. And you see this day after day if you flip from MSNBC to Fox in how they describe Donald Trump. Right on Fox, he's a populist, he's genuine, he speaks a language people can understand. And on MSNBC, you know, he's a fraud and he's a moron, or even more in depth. Chris Hedges recently tore Trump a new one by being a fraud. But it's really the same thing you described. They're using a selected set of facts about this person to paint a narrative that they want to tell.
Yeah, and like, let's like simplify the equation a little bit, and let's assume. Honestly, in my experience, like even the mainstream media, and they are, believe me, like I get it, they are disingenuous in so many ways, but they don't usually, they do, but they don't usually just present just completely false facts, like totally verifiably that's just pure literal garbage. Or crap, you know. And in the article, like the two examples, you know, one is like, oh, like this president was great for the economy, and the other one, the point was like, oh, there's this president who was terrible for the economy, and they're both basing what they're saying actual, you know, statistics, numbers that check out. Those are verifiable, you know, and they're using them in these completely different ways, they're completely different things, you know. Lost train of thought there.
Well, you use
What were we
that
talking
to
about?
describe how facts can actually be manipulated to tell different kinds of news stories.
Oh yeah. So like it's the facts, you know, like that's not usually the issue. Although sometimes it is. Like so during the election, during the primaries, like I remember, and I actually wrote an article on Bernie or Bust at the time too. And I was following your guys' work. And around that same time, the New York Times like did actually publish a total falsehood. Like they said, it was like Bernie needed to win 75% of the rest of the states or something at that time, which is just, you know, it's math, man. It's literally not true. Like, you know, and I demonstrated it and I tried to call them out, you know. So that they do also falsify things. But generally speaking, the media's deception is not at the level of fact. Like they tend to actually be, you know, pretty tight in that arena, but it's their selection of facts. And then that's where objectivity becomes this huge problem, because then you can like, look, I told the truth about these facts. That was factually accurate. Therefore, my account is objective, you know, and you should believe this, you know. And so that's when they begin to frame their narratives as in this, with this air of authority, you know, they don't deserve. They don't deserve, because they are perspectives, and they
Sure
have an agenda and interest and value.
Everyone's a perspective. I think that's one of the points. So when you want to get a better understanding, maybe it's about a war that's being started, or a scandal, or an important scandal that might lead to impeachment, or something you're really interested in, something you want to learn and really understand very well, and get the facts, and learn sort of the real story as the best you can. What are your media sources for that?
Honestly, I try not to pick too many favorites, because like to me, as I said, well, kind of like being aware of like, okay, like what this person just said is garbage, and then what this person just said is factual, you know, but it's also coming from a perspective. So like, so long as I'm maintaining that awareness, and one that, like for me personally, like I always need to know who owns the outlet, the company, you know, who owns this media, because that is really important. And I think that anyone who investigates that will find that there's always a connection there between the content of like the media and what's presented, and the ownership, who owns the stock, you know. That's an important one. But so I mean, honestly, I just hit the social media. So that's what I'm a fan of. Social media, I think it's beautiful. I think, or it used to be really beautiful. Now it's getting kind of destroyed. But like, ideally social media, like you have all these people kind of curating content and bringing it up to the top, and they'll always bring up to the top the things that are being pushed the hardest, you know, like concerted effort. Like I catch with North Korea a lot too. Like all of a sudden, just like every outlet will come out with this story about how North Korea is hiding nuclear weapons, and it's like it's because, you know, North Korea is going to destroy the world for I don't know what reason, but and so like whenever that happens, like I always see that pushed to the top of, you know, the Facebook, Twitter, you know, Reddit. Reddit I think is actually an amazing source, like it's an amazing aggregator of sources, you know. And so then from there, you know, I try to get like the kind of broader view. All right, like what is it that people are talking about? What is it that the media, as a general kind of entity, what is being pushed right now? And then I start to grab the particulars. And yeah, I mean, aside from, I almost never check like, you know, like Breitbart or, you know, I could care less what InfoWars is going on about. And
so I'm curious, you just said it's not as good as it used to be. Something's going awry or is downhill or something. Are you referring to Facebook's massive purging of media sites that was collaborated with Twitter doing the same thing? Is that what you mean? That it's not as good as it used to be?
Yeah. Yeah. That's essentially what I mean. And I've written a few articles on it, but I try not to like, I guess like cry about it publicly too much, because that's like, if you start shouting about how you're being censored and all that, like it just kind of helps to censor you, because then you look like a nutbag, and and people don't like it. It's usually a good look, or like kind of like Al Gore after the 2000 election, you know, him calling out legitimately, you know, like shit was going down in Florida, but it's just crying about it publicly like did not help him. It actually kind of sure. Way I think.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if that is what you were referring to.
Yeah, I personally expect like a huge, massive drop, particularly on Facebook. Like Facebook used to be my #1 source of traffic for years, and now it's I think like #3 or something. It's mainly like search engines, Reddit, Twitter, that kind of thing, and reprints from other websites. But yeah, Facebook has massively clamped down on.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I have to wonder how much of that we're responsible for. Although we haven't been banned off the platform yet, but what they are basically purging people off this platform for is exactly what we did to build the Burn Your Bus movement. We did this through social media, and I gave tutorials. I gave tutorials on how people could use the same little clickbait sort of teaser, and then the same URL to one particular narrative, pledge narrative on our website, over and over and over again on the groups. But don't go too fast, because you get thrown in Facebook jail. Well, now you get thrown off Facebook. You're done in that platform if you're caught doing something like that again. So we have to be very careful this next time around.
I have many friends that have had that experience too. It's I just wanted to speak to, I know it's I don't want to get too off topic or whatever, but I think that you're absolutely right. Like we're responsible, like not necessarily me and you together, but like in general, like the independent, you know, me, citizen journalists, people stepping up like collectively to sort of share and exchange information and to organize online. That I think that is essentially what happened was like the older generation got caught off guard, you know, by like this, specifically like the Sanders campaign was just full of these, you know, all these millennials, like of whom I'm a part, and we know how to use computers. Like that's one thing. We grew up online, the first generation to have done that. And I think that, yeah, they totally freaked out because like movements like Burn Your Bus and like just these different sort of things that they used to be able to kind of keep the lid on, and then all of a sudden they weren't able to. It was because of social media. But unfortunately, it looks like they've learned pretty well from their mistake, and I'm honestly not sure where we're going to go from here.
Yeah, it's going to be a different challenge, this and a bigger challenge this coming time around. We do have a new strategy we're going to launch day after New Year's. I want to do something pretty unusual now and actually ask the viewers a specific question. In my introduction to John, there's something I didn't mention that's very clear on his website, particularly on his About His page. John is a communist. And so, viewer, I'm asking you now, does that change your perception of John? Does that change your understanding of his answers? And if it does, why? Is it because you've accepted a narrative that's coming from these corporate media channels? Or is it because of narrative that's grown over the years from your parents who maybe accepted the narrative of the government or whatever? Did this change your understanding of John or John's answers or John's perception or description or analysis of the media? And if it did, why? Why is it that somebody's political orientation might affect you in some way like that? So think about that, and you can leave your answer in the comments below. John, I want to thank you for joining me. I appreciate this, and I'm going to have you back because we're going to be talking about climate change a lot in the future, and that's another article that that you've written and I want to address sometime.
Yeah, I'd be glad to come back whenever you're laughing. That's an important issue.
Yep, the issue, isn't it? All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes we'll be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.